I'd sing it, but
Oh, not too bad. Spur of the moment.
yes.
So,
Thank you, guys.
thanks for bearing with us.
So for the past couple of weeks, over the past couple of weeks, really, we've got to celebrate a lot of things together. We got to celebrate baptism. Was that a couple of weeks back, right? 7 kids were baptized into the faith. Last week we got to celebrate communion together as a body. And these are celebrations. That's what they are. Who we are as Christians. And we've also, over the past several weeks, got to pray with one another, for one another, as you know, some of you are facing really difficult things, whether it's treatment for an ongoing illness, or financial difficulties. Some are seeking clarification from God. What is it you're doing in these difficult circumstances that we're in? Are you calling me to something new? I know some of you are looking at other job opportunities, that sort of thing. Will God open or close doors as He sees fit? We've been praying about highs and lows together and celebrating. And that's all of those things, the celebration, the prayer for the highs and lows, all of those things, that's what makes us a family. That's what binds us together as the body. That we celebrate and we link arms in the difficult times as well. And we've been away from the Gospel of Mark for the last couple of weeks as we've gone through some of those celebrations. And we're going to return there this morning. Mark 5 is where I will begin at the very beginning, Mark 5:1. But I want to kind of catch us up a little bit in my previous sermons through Mark. A few weeks back, the last sermon I did over Mark, we made it through verse 34 in Mark 4. And I want to fill in what happened at the very end of the book of Mark, or the chapter 4 of the book of Mark, before we get to chapter 5 this morning. Because in chapter 5, we see Jesus is getting out of a boat and things happen. But what happened at the end of Mark 4 is Jesus got into a boat. Mark 5, he gets out. Mark 4, he got in. But there's a little bit more to it. After he got into this boat, in Mark chapter 4, and they began selling, he said, okay, we're going to cross the lake and go to the other side of the lake. Tells his disciples that. So they get in the boat and they start going, and a huge storm arises. And the waves are big, and the wind is blowing, and it's raining. And Mark tells us that the boat begins to take on water. And the disciples, who are seasoned fishermen and think are used to this sort of thing, well, it must have been a really bad storm because they're freaking out, right? And Jesus, during this whole time, is asleep in the back of the boat, Mark tells us. And the disciples go and they wake him up, and they're scared out of their minds, and they wake Jesus up, and he does what? He tells the storm to stop. He quiets the storm, the wind dies down, the waves die down, and he looks at the disciples, and he says a couple of things. First of all, he says, "Why are you so frightened?" Which, well, there's a big storm. That's why we were so frightened. And then he says, "Don't you have any faith yet?" And the disciples don't say anything, really, to that we have recorded. It just says that they were amazed, and that they were puzzled at this person who can do this, who can tell a storm to stop being a storm. So that is what happened at the end of Mark chapter 4. That kind of prepares us for where we're at in Mark 5. So Mark 5, starting in verse 1, hopefully you've all found that. If you feel led, if you would please stand this morning as we read. Mark 5, verses 1 through 10 begin. It says this: Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He had been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and he smashed the leg irons. And no one was tough enough to control him. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and he'd cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus coming from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He responded, "Legion is my name, because we are many." And they pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. But God, may every word that I say be from you this morning. God, may our hearts be open to what you're doing in our midst. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You see it. So in verse 2 there, we see Mark is up to his old tricks. His literary style says, as soon as Jesus got out of the boat, this man approached him. That's Mark's kind of signature quick action is going on. As soon as Jesus gets out of the boat, this man approaches him. And this man with an evil spirit, who has, or several, obviously, we'll get to that. He's possessed by many spirits, many demons, and he comes out of the tombs and he approaches Jesus. And in verse 3 tells us that the cemetery wasn't just a cemetery, but it was this guy. It was Legion's home. He lived there. Most likely he lived in the caves that were prepared for the bodies of the locals, right? So that's what they usually did. They found an area where there were lots of caves, and they used those as tombs. Now, according to Mosaic law, if somebody comes into contact with a dead body, they're considered ritually unclean for 7 days. That's Jewish law. For 7 days. And I've never, if they come into direct contact with the body. Now, I've never found anything in the law that speaks of walking through a cemetery or being in a cemetery, that making somebody unclean. But if this individual lived there, chances are, if he's sleeping in the caves that are to be tombs, chances are pretty high that he's come into contact with dead bodies, and probably on a regular basis. So he's ritually unclean all the time, most likely. He's living in that close a proximity with death, and not just the physical uncleanliness, but he's again possessed by many demons, and that's making him unclean. Even really in today's society, there's still kind of a taboo about living in a graveyard or even near a graveyard, right? Not many people want to live right next door to the cemetery. It's just a thing in our heads. It's that proximity to death. And that was...
I worked there for 15 years.
I thought of you as I was writing this. I'm like, there's that taboo that, he is a grave digger, or he works in a mortuary. I don't want anything to do with that. I understand.
God and I came through a lot of things
Right.
in 15 years.
Right. But I think, if nothing else, it's an unusual place for Jesus and his disciples to go and to meet somebody to minister to, at the very least. And not only the aspect of this man's uncleanliness, though. This person is wild. He's dangerous. He's immensely strong because of the demonic presence in his body and his life. He was a threat to others, and he was a danger to himself. Mark tells us that he used to cut himself with stones. So he's dangerous, and yet Jesus allows him to approach. Jesus allows him to come right near to him. In fact, I wonder if it wasn't Jesus' compassion for this individual that first led him to say, we're going to go across the lake. There's something for us across the lake. And that was, Jesus was driven to go and to find. I want to go back to verse 6 here in chapter 5 for a moment, mostly because I'm curious about it. Verse 6 says this, when Legion, the man, saw Jesus from far away, he ran and he knelt before him. It says that, it doesn't say that the person ran away from him. It says that he ran to him. Now, certainly, Jesus was recognized by the demons. They've been in his presence before. But I doubt that this man, that Legion, in his humanity, had any prior contact with Jesus. We don't know that, but it seems unlikely. So he probably didn't know what Jesus could and maybe would do for him. But the demons knew. And that makes me wonder if there wasn't some part of him, some part of this man, his humanity, that was still awake enough to say, these demons that are in me are scared and want to go away. I want to go towards them. Was there some sort of internal conflict going inside of him? That he said, you know what? These demons are scared. I want to go towards whatever's making them scared because maybe something better can happen. It's really just speculation on my part, but I'm curious about it. And once Legion comes to Jesus, we see that the demons are even more afraid. And Jesus, speaks to them, and he asks his name, and they say Legion, because there's a lot of them. And Legion is a Roman military term that really just stands for a large group of soldiers. In the commentaries I've read over the years, the number varies from 1,000 to 5,000, depending upon what resource I've used, and depending upon what time in the Roman period, what part of Roman history you're looking at. The term legion seems to expand over the years. But it means a lot. At the very least, it means a lot, and it's usually a military term. And they say to him, they tell him his name, they say that there's a lot of us, and then they ask him, don't send us out of this region. Were they on a mission? Were they given a directive to go to this region and to inflict chaos and evil? All of that leads us to the next section of Mark 5. Starting in verse 11, we read this account. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. Send us into the pigs, they begged. The demons begged. Let us go into the pigs. Jesus gave them permission. So the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. And people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons sitting there fully dressed and completely sane, and they were filled with awe. And those who had actually seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man told the others about the pigs. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave the region. So the townspeople want Jesus to leave. And if you'll remember verse 10, the demons didn't want to leave. Instead of focusing on the good done for one individual by Jesus, these townspeople, maybe unwittingly, but they sided with the demonic in this situation. When demons want to stay in your region, and you want Jesus to leave your region, I don't think it's a stretch to say that you're in a bad place spiritually. Demons want to stay there, and you want to get Jesus out of there. That's a bad situation to be in. But if you think of it from a human standpoint, the townspeople response, it's kind of understandable. I remember a few years back when I was working on a sermon. It was in Luke, but it's a parallel account. It's the same account, but Luke's point of view. It's in Luke 8. And I apologize, I probably told this story to some of you, but it was when I was at Caldwell. I was the associate pastor, and Pastor Dick and I were preaching through Luke, and it was my turn to preach, and I had Luke 8. And so I was reading the account, like I said, the parallel account. And I didn't know where to go with what I was reading. I was kind of stuck. And it was midweek, I think it was a Wednesday, and I decided, I had driven to work that day, but I thought, I'm going to walk home for lunch, just to clear my head and then eat lunch and walk back. It's about a 1.5 mile walk. And on on the way, I decided I'm going to listen through the Gospel of Luke. And I started chapter 6 just to kind of get a flow of what was going on. And so I'm listening to it as I'm walking through Caldwell. And if you've never been to Caldwell, it's kind of a hilly town. And so I was going up and down hills. And as I come up one of the last hill on the way out of town, it's on 7th Street, right past the kids' school and the baseball field where I coached. And you come up the hill and it plateaus off and you're at the cemetery. And the cemetery in Caldwell is on both sides of 7th Avenue. So you're surrounded by cemetery as you come up the hill. And as I'm walking, and as I get over the hill, it's Luke 8, and it's this account of Legion that I'm listening to. I put my earbuds in and I was just listening to my Bible app. And it's this exact scene as I'm walking into the cemetery. And I remember stopping and looking around, and I paused my Bible app, and I remember thinking, what if something like this happened in our little town? In Caldwell. And Caldwell's bigger than, what if something like this happened in our little town in Priest River? What if we kept our dangerous people chained up in the local cemetery? And we basically what you're saying to them is, you're as good as dead. You're dangerous. You're scary. You're weird. You're obviously a threat. You're unhinged. You're unclean. You're messy and you're evil. And we just don't have time to deal with this. And frankly, we're scared that whatever is infected you might affect us. It's your disease. It's your problem. It's your uncleanliness. And it's a problem for us. Never mind that it's a problem for the individual, but it's a problem for us, and we don't want it to spread to us. But do you see how problematic that type of thinking is for Christians, for the kingdom of God? If we apply that type of thinking to the church, afraid uncleanliness will affect our cleanliness, instead of allowing Jesus to use us to overcome evil with good. Now, obviously we have to use some discretion, I get that, but we should never use that idea of, I'm trying to be discreet here, we should never use that idea of as an excuse to keep us from doing what God has called us to do, or what God might want to do through our actions. We can't use that as an excuse to tell someone who's messy and unhinged and potentially dangerous about Jesus, or living Jesus out in front of them, right? Because who knows what Jesus can do through his contact with the other. Cleanliness overwhelms uncleanliness. Light overwhelms darkness. That's what we're called to be. I heard another pastor was telling me a story about something along these lines just recently. And it's a friend of his, so a friend of a friend. Lived in a small town, kind of like Priest River. Not a lot going on in the town. It was a small church. They met in homes and local school. They didn't have their own building to meet in, right? And they began praying, what does God want us to do in our town? How can we be Jesus in this town? And so they're praying together. What's your direction for us? What's your vision for us? And the town had a problem with drunk drivers. And there was one bar in particular that seemed to always be traced back to. And so what this church decided to do was, we're going to minister to that bar. We're going to offer free rides home to these drunks to keep them off the road. You know this story. And so that's how they began ministering to their towns. They began giving rides to drunks. And what happened? Well, as they gave rides and as they would leave notes and let people know, well, this is where you can pick up your car, or if you need any help, let us know. They began building relationships with these people. And what happened was there were less drunks. And if there's less drunks, there's less business at a bar, right? So the bar's business started to dwindle. And eventually, it started to dwindle to such an extent that they had to sell their bar. And guess who bought the bar? The church bought the bar. And that's where they had church, was in what used to be a bar, because they ministered and were Christ to these people who were struggling with alcoholism. So what can Jesus affect through us? Instead of, I don't want to touch that, it's dirty, I might get infected. No, what can I infect with Jesus? But back to the townspeople in Mark 5, and again, it's understandable, this response, right? You know, hypothetically, we chain up the dangerous people in the local cemetery, and then Jesus, another guy comes into town and says, I'm going to set him free, and he's healed. Wait a minute, we know that guy. And he's dangerous, and he's hurting himself, and he's going to hurt somebody else, and you're going to come into town and set him free? You need to go. Right? I mean, that seems like a reasonable way to think. You need to go. You, the guy who's letting all the dangerous, unhinged individuals free, you need to go. You're a problem. You're messing with our safety, right? Sometimes Jesus is going to mess with our safety. That's just a fact. I don't know how many of you have read The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. But in I think it's in the very first book, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan, the lion, who is the Christ figure in those stories, is described this way. He's described, they're asking, is he good? Yeah, he's good. He's very good. But he's not safe. Same thing goes with Jesus. He's very good. He's not always safe. Jesus, in Mark 5, though, he yields to the masses. He yields to the townspeople, and clearly they weren't in a place to hear what he had to say. They weren't in a place where they could receive the teaching that he was going to give. They weren't really listening to what he was saying, right? And I can't help but seeing some irony in this situation when I think back of Jesus' words, where he said, do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they turn and they trample you. And then you have this picture of pigs going off a cliff. Well, Jesus didn't want to give his pearls before swine, before these townspeople, because they weren't ready to receive it. They were going to turn and trample him if he stayed there. So this leads us to the last portion of Mark 5 for the morning, verse 18. 18 through 20, and it says this in Mark 5. While he was climbing into the boat, the one who had been demon-possessed pleaded with Jesus to let him come along as one of his disciples, but Jesus wouldn't allow it. Go home to your own people, Jesus said, and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy. And the man went away and began to proclaim in the 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. This man, this lone individual who had been known as Legion, he's now left alone, left as the only witness of Christ, and instructed to just tell people what God did for you. Go home and share how God had mercy on you. What can one of us do if we listen to the words that Jesus is giving us, the instructions that he is giving us through the scripture this morning? What can one of us do if we cease to be afraid of what might happen to us, if we embrace and get involved with the mess of other people, instead of being afraid that it's going to infect us? Is God messing with your safety? Is he calling you to do something scary? Is he calling you to do something that you don't feel at all prepared for? Like the man who's healed from who knows how long he'd been in that situation. He's healed, and Jesus says, now you need to go and tell your story. He's given a mission right away, and he didn't have it all together. He didn't have everything figured out just yet. I doubt it. He wasn't fully trained. He wasn't fully mature in Christ, but he was sent. And I'm sure he was scared. but he knew what Jesus had done for him, and he wanted to share that. And he was commissioned to share that. So from legion to one, from forgotten, from as good as dead in the cemetery, to cleansed and healed and given a job, a mission by Jesus. Is Jesus messing with your safety this morning is the question I have. Is he calling you out into something new? And you don't have it all figured out yet. Well, join the club. I don't have it all figured out yet either. But is he commissioning you and giving you a job? Or maybe it's not to that place yet. Maybe he's just whispering to you, don't be afraid that you will get infected. Instead, go and affect the world. Are you just beginning to have that thought? As we come to our time of prayer together this morning, I want to continue what we've been doing the last few weeks as far as praying together. If you grabbed a prayer chain list, that's great. If you're on the prayer chain, you know some of the needs in the room. And you also know of other needs that maybe aren't on those prayer lists. You know each other. I want to invite you once again just to gather around. If you specifically know and want prayer, if you feel comfortable standing where you're at or raising your hand or just getting people's attention somehow, or if you want to come forward and pray with me, I'll meet you up here to pray as well. Or if you just need to pray alone in the quiet of your heart, whatever the posture of prayer for you this morning looks like, to come forward, to stand, or to be in a group, or just to be alone, I just want to invite us into prayer together this morning. And then when the time seems right, I'll come back up and I'll close us anyway.